So good evening. Are we on, Elsa?
Yeah.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome all of you to the Grieving Hearts seminar series. We're happy to host this group here finally in person for the first time in, I believe, 2 years. So it's great to see some familiar faces. We have a lot of familiar names and faces on our attendance list. But for those of you attending for the first time, I'd like to introduce to you Christy Mcmillan. Christine has been guiding and counseling families in Windsor, Essex County for over 25 years as a clinical social worker. She's been working directly with Families First for almost 7 years and is a valued and treasured part of our Families First team. We as funeral directors often hear the same questions asked. Once the funeral process is ended and everyone is trying to return to the new norm, what's next? This is where we rely heavily on experts like Christine to help answer questions about the bereavement process and everyone's individual grief journeys. It's great to see you again, Christine. Without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you so much. Thank you to Alyssa. Thank you to Colin. Thank you to the Families First team. I am grateful to be back in person. And I know that if you have lost a loved one in the last 2 years, I want to acknowledge right now that you've got additional challenges. You've been deprived not only of your loved one, but you've been deprived of funeral rituals as well. So I do acknowledge that. I want to thank Families First for not only caring for families in our community when you need them most in your most vulnerable time, but also to provide the aftercare, and I'm honored to be associated with Families First. Prior to me being affiliated with them in my private practice, my relationship goes back probably close to 20 years with Families First. So I was 14 years at Canadian Mental Health in the bereavement program. So I know them to be a very caring organization, and I'm grateful to be here. Normally we're here about an hour and a half. Usually we take a break, but because of COVID, we haven't been able to offer you refreshments, but at some point in time we might take a stretch break. But at any point in time, if you need to get up, if you need to stretch your legs, if you need to take a walk outside, if you need to use the restrooms, please feel free to do that. I will not be insulted at all. And for the restrooms, if you don't know, take the doors that you came in here, and they're directly in front of you, both men and women. Okay? So tonight, I just want you to know that the presentation is very general. I don't know all of you, I know some of you, I don't know all of you in the room. I don't know your stories. So the presentation's general. If it doesn't speak specifically to you, or there's something outstanding, either come and talk to me or give me a call, and we can set up a session. Okay. So having said that, we'll start. But before we start, I just want to I want you to do a check-in. And I want you to do a check-in, an internal check-in, because grief is all about our insides. Yes?
Big problem.
You can't hear?
No.
No, it doesn't sound like the mic's on.
The microphone.
Thank you.
I'm turning it up.
Okay, we're just going to get some technical help here. It's a little better, but...
Is that one on?
It's on. No, this is a little high.
No, it's not working.
This one isn't, right?
No.
What volume?
Yeah.
Well, I could Oh, John may be able to help us. Oh, okay. I usually charge you money. There we go. How's that? Thank you. Yeah, that would have been a waste of time, wouldn't it? I have been told I have a loud voice, but obviously not loud enough. But thank you. Appreciate that. I know I need an IT department for my practice. And I can do the front of the house stuff. I can't do the back of the house stuff. That's
And I've
also
checked it
important.
in 3 minutes.
So I'm going to leave this here. So, as I was saying, we're going to just kind of do a check-in on our internal self, okay? Our internal environment. So, whether you want to close your eyes for a moment if you feel comfortable, whether you want to stare at an object, I want you to just take a moment, and I want you to take a few deep breaths, okay? So I want you to just inhale and slowly exhale. And I'd like you to do that at home too, for those of you joining us online. So just relax. And I want you just to kind of be aware of how you're feeling right now. Are you nervous? Are you agitated? Are you excited to be here? Are you angry you have to be here? Were you dragged here? Were you persuaded to come here? Just acknowledge whatever it is you're feeling, because nothing is wrong. Whatever you're feeling, you're feeling. And then I also want you to be okay with whatever feelings come up in the time we're going to have together. Okay? So every so often, if you close your eyes, you can reopen them. Every so often, just check in with yourself. What are you feeling right now? Okay. So, moving on. It's used a lot, isn't it? It's a very common term. It's used usually by other people, isn't it? Are you moving on yet? Have you moved on? And then the bereaved start to wonder, I should be moving on. What's wrong with me? See, because grief is really messy, if you haven't noticed. It's messy, it's untidy, it's inconvenient, it's inefficient, it's painful. And when the bereaved don't like feeling that way, well, other people around them don't like it either, so we want to move you through. So what does this mean? What are we moving on from? How do other people know I'm ready to move on? It's an enigma, isn't it? Because it's very abstract. What does this mean, moving on? So let's just, for tonight's purposes, because it is the title of our presentation tonight, we're going to use that term, moving on. So what are we moving on from? This thing called grief? This very normal, natural reaction as a result of attachment, but when you've been deprived of the person you were attached to. You wouldn't be here if you weren't attached to your loved one. So I said normal, but we don't feel normal, do we? We don't feel it's natural, but it is. And while it's highly universal, because if you have the capacity to attach, and the person you're attached to is no longer available to you, you will have grief reactions. Not necessarily like the person next to you or the person next door to you, but you are going to have some form of grief reaction. It's not a problem, it's not a condition that we have to overcome. It is a process that we have to go through in order for it to integrate into our lives. No one reads the fine print when we call people into our lives or we become attached to them, right? The fine print that says if you're the one that outlives your loved one, you will experience loss and pain. So when we're experiencing loss and grief, we've got really two choices: suppression or expression. So suppression could look like any one of these things on this list. I don't think anyone's going to raise their hand and say, I've done all of them, or I've done most of them. But I'd be highly suspicious if you said you haven't done one of them at some point in time. And specific to a kind of loss, if you've lost a partner or a spouse.
A suppression activity of not doing your grief work might be rushing into another relationship prematurely. If you've had an infant or child loss, you may decide you want a baby. Because basically that's what our culture tells you, right?
So this is what suppression looks like. Now, having said that, we do need some distraction in grief. We cannot be in our grief and in the darkness all the time. We need a relief. But as you can see on that list, there's a lot, that word excessive. Anything done in excess, consciously or subconsciously, to distract ourselves away from the grief when grief is trying to get our attention, is a form of suppressing our pain that needs to be felt in order for it to be integrated into our life. At our society's core is an effort to deny pain of all kinds, to avoid handling grief and anything unpleasant. We are taught to ignore, deny, and cover up loss. Instead, we run to addictive behaviors, food, drugs, shopping, etc., as a way to salve the pain. We look for a quick relief for all that ails us. Moliere actually said it much better. If you suppress grief too much, it can well redouble. So while grief tries to get your attention through tears, through triggers, if you continuously choose to ignore it, the price you're going to pay later is much greater. Because grief is so abstract,
I tend to use examples. And one of my favorite examples is if I don't want to pay my electricity bill, because I really don't like paying it, and I decide I'm just going to ignore it this month and I'm going to toss it in the kitchen drawer, and I'm going to toss it in the kitchen drawer month after month after month. And then I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that nothing happens. Well, the cost is going to be much higher later. So when I am supporting people that come to see me early in the grief process, I'm doing bereavement counseling. If you suppress your grief for a longer period of time, you're probably engaging in one of those behaviors, which means you're actually adding a few layers then to your grief. And then if you come to see me, I'm doing grief therapy with you. So before we get to the grief, we have to deal with the other issues that have most probably caused additional challenges in your life. But I'm going to say it's also not easy to move towards your grief. So the other option then is expression. Suppression or expression. And that's done through this wonderful thing we call mourning. Nature has given us this opportunity to process our grief through mourning. This is how I take my internal landscape, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, even if it's uncomfortable. Things like jealousy or bitterness or anger. Whatever it is we're feeling, and we give it expression outside of ourselves. It's grief gone public. Usually, it's dictated by culture, cultural norms. Unfortunately, we're not very good in this society. We move you away from it. We're a death-denying, mourning-avoiding culture. And because we live in this culture, this society, we're going to integrate those messages. Keep busy, move on, don't think about it, put the pictures away, take their messages off the answering machine, it's only going to hurt. Instead of, let me hold your hand while you walk through the pain. We love from the outside in, but we mourn from the inside out. And what mourning does, it creates momentum. So grief comes to us in waves. So I'm just going to quickly remind everyone if they could just put their phones on mute, and I'm going to double check mine. We're just so used to having our phones with us, right? So when the grief hits us, and we turn around and face it, which is facing the pain or the whatever it is, and we find a way to release it, then what we're doing is we're creating movement forward. If we continue to suppress it, we remain frozen in that time and space. So while time would have passed, you haven't done anything to process your grief. So time doesn't heal everything. Time is just time. It's what you do with it. It's how you use it. And it's to your advantage, obviously. It's to your advantage, obviously, to express it. Today, somebody called me and we were chatting, and she very honestly said, I'm scared. I'm scared to feel my pain. I said, yeah. Absolutely. And she says, but I know I have to. I know I have to, but I'm scared. I said, are you scared that it will swallow you up? And she said, that's exactly how I feel. I feel that I would get swallowed up by it if I let it out just a little bit. Outside of having any serious mental health issues with emotional dysregulation, and that can also be overcome Most people can tolerate it. Most people can get through it. We just have to believe. But getting back to this caller today, at the very end she said to me, I guess my loved one deserves that I live my life well. I guess he deserves it, that I go on and I live my life well, which means feeling the pain before I go on and live my life. So, what are ways that we express our pain? If you're comfortable, by a show of hands, anyone done any of these things? Oh, good stuff. It hurts, but it's worth it. Because as we move gently, we dose ourselves. Okay, Alan Wolfelt calls it dosing yourself with your grief. When you get a prescription, you don't take the whole bottle. You dose yourself. You titrate, right? So that's why grief comes in waves. So when you write your love letter or your journal entry, it may hurt for that moment, but you can also feel a lot of relief after that. And the next time you go to write your love letter, it hurts a little less. So all of those things, there are actions. You have to consciously decide how you're going to mourn. So I don't make anybody a crier. I don't expect anyone who doesn't like writing to journal. I do, however, expect the people that I'm supporting to find the best way they can to do their mourning. If your body needs to shed tears and you're holding it back, then you're really going against nature. So whatever it is, whichever way you need to release the pain from your internal landscape, I highly recommend that you do. And trust that you can do it. Any questions? Comments? Anything you'd like me to review? Repeat? Okay. We got a really bright audience here, Alyssa. Or they're all asleep. So, what is this we're talking about? What do you have to mourn? Okay? What happens to you in the grief process? So, other than disbelief and numbness, which we all experience at the beginning of the process, even if you knew your loved one was dying, you could experience any of those. No order. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to be jealous. You don't have to experience guilt or regret. But if you see yourself up there, guess what? It's okay. It's okay. This is an overwhelming process. Basically, this is how it affects us. So if I took the last slide and put them into nice little neat categories, that's how grief affects you. It's not just emotional. Grief is stress, so it affects us physically. We're lethargic, we're tired, we're fatigued, our head hurts, stomach, backaches. Oh, it affects our thinking. Because when we're emotional, more than we usually are, it takes our thinking offline. It's not a permanent state, don't worry about it. However, it could be if you choose suppression. It affects us socially. We want to be with people, we don't want to be with people. People tick us off very easily. Get angry at people. I see people nodding back there. Yep. Yep. Just use your inside voice when you want to say something that isn't nice. Okay? No? Okay. And it affects us spiritually, but not religion, but in terms of meaning, purpose, why. It has the potential to reorganize how you look at life, how you live your life, what your values are. So, is grief worth it? I'd say so. Unless you decide you're not ever going to attach again, in any form, at any degree, at any level. Some time ago, historically, it was felt that in order to process grief, we had to withdraw all our energy from our loved one and refocus it on something or someone else. So we divested all our energy, all our focus. Well, thank goodness that we've got other models. And I'm not talking about the stages of grief. Okay? I'm talking about how we process it. So, I'm going to use this model in terms of what you have to do if you're willing to do your mourning or expressing of your grief. So the first one is, well, it's kind of obvious, accept the reality of the loss. But what this refers to is you know, but you don't know. This refers to the head knowing, but the heart not knowing. This is where you alternate between belief and disbelief. This is when I hear things like, it's so surreal. I still can't believe he's gone. I thought I heard her in the other room. So when we have finally reconciled it, it's like our heart has caught up to our head. A gentleman very early in my bereavement career who had lost his youngest child to suicide. The child was a teenager. When I explained this to him, he said, I have a lot of real estate between my head and my heart, which meant it was going to take a long time. And some deaths too. Some deaths challenge us beyond just missing. So we go back and forth. We go through the motions, we go to work, we feed the kids, we pay our electricity bill, we do those kinds of things. But then our heart always tugs us back, and we can't believe they're gone. And then we think we're losing our mind, because our head knows, right? What's going on? What's wrong? Why do I still believe or feel that they're still here? Because our heart is a reluctant learner. And you had an attachment based on love, which comes from the heart. You didn't have a business relationship. Funeral rituals are important because they start the grieving process. The reason that originally the bodies were laid out, and I know we don't do that anymore, you can choose to have your loved one cremated, but the reason behind that is because it starts this process. The reality of the loss. I know my clients who have not been with their loved ones when they've died, or didn't get a chance to see them because of the circumstances of the death, by well-meaning professionals who said, no, I wouldn't suggest you see the body. And a bereavement person would never say that. We need to see that to start the process. Because what will happen is our mind will play tricks, or should I say our heart. Well, maybe it wasn't them. What if they're still alive? That's that separation anxiety. Because we don't want to believe it. The second task, now, sorry, although I should clarify, even though they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going to go back and forth, all right? Please, that's just the way it is. The second task I'd like to discuss is to experience and process the pain of grief. So let's go back to the last few slides. When we're tempted not to feel the pain, you might suppress. Understandable. But grief will keep knocking. It will keep trying to get your attention. Like that electricity bill, until the lights are turned off. So ironically, the way for the pain to soften is to dose yourself with it. Is to have the courage to slowly feel the pain, let the wave wash over you, put your grief down, pick up life. When grief taps you on the shoulder or hits you on the side of the head, when the next wave comes, you turn around and face it. And you feel it. And then you put it down, and then you pick up life. And that's what you do. You go back and forth. Any questions? Third one, adjust to an environment without your loved one. Here we're talking about on two different levels. There's external adjustments and internal adjustments. So externally, it is, okay, now who cuts the lawn? Who takes the kids to school? What do I say when somebody asks me how many children I have? Do I include my deceased child? Who has Christmas dinner now that mom's gone, right? That's an external adjustment. An internal adjustment is, who am I now without this person? How have I changed? What are my core beliefs now? Are my values changed? Have they been threatened? Did you have subconsciously a belief that bad things happen to other people? It wouldn't happen to you. Who am I without this person? Am I still a person? Do I have meaning? Because the people that are in our lives give our life meaning. They help us to make sense of the world. So it challenges our belief. That's your internal landscape. So the outside adjustments are what other people see. Right? And people judge you based on that. Well, you look so good. You must be doing really well. But they don't see your insides. And when you have done your grief work, a really important part, and it's a natural outcome, I can almost guarantee you, a natural outcome is to find a connection to your loved one based on spirit or memory, but not physical. So we're not talking about divesting all your attention and placing it somewhere else. It's about how do I remain connected with my loved one as I live my life. I'll share with you a personal story. Some of you may know. 25 years ago, I lost my first child. She was stillborn. And that obviously changed the trajectory of my life and my plans. Wasn't in my plan. And I was not doing this work. And I went through all of this. I did my grief work. I questioned my higher power. I was angry. I was profoundly sad. I wondered what my purpose was. I was under construction, like probably most of you are right here. I had great people to walk with me through it. And I came out the other side. And then I started volunteering at the Canadian Mental Health and the bereavement program, and I ran the group for parents who had lost infants. And then I applied for a position there. This is my continuing bond with Hannah. This is my enduring connection with her. I'm not focused on it every day. It's just now part of my life. So it comes naturally out of the work of grief. How am I going to remember them? How am I going to take their memory with me as I move on? So reconciling to loss doesn't mean you forget. Especially if you've made a connection. And it could be private and personal. Mothers against drunk drivers. Is that mom's enduring connection to her daughter? However, if we suppress, these are the possible implications. So if we suppress, it will redouble and show itself in any of these outcomes. Rain, after all, is just rain. It is not bad weather. So also pain is just pain. Unless we resist it, then it becomes torment. So pain isn't an option when you've attached and you're experiencing grief. Suffering, however, is your choice. You can honor your past, you can treasure your past, you can love your past. However, you cannot live in your past. Questions, comments, anything you disagree with? So, what's moving on? What does it mean? Doesn't mean you forget. Doesn't mean it's the end. Doesn't mean closure. And I do another presentation on closure. Doesn't mean you're over it. I'm sure you've heard this from people. You over it? Are you done? Have you reached closure? Doesn't mean any of those things. I accept that I cannot control the fact that I have suffered loss, but I can control what I'm going to do with the life that I have been handed. Whatever I decide to do, I will do so with understanding that by exploring new opportunities and experiences, I'm not casting aspersion or disrespecting my past. I'm actually taking control of a situation over which I may have had little or no control by honoring my past without living in my past. Welcoming today and designing my destiny and embracing a future of my choosing. But you can't rush to that either, which is what our culture would have you believe. They've gone, they're in a better place, they're not in pain any longer. They wouldn't want you to feel this way. Well, when I die, I hope some people are sad. Right? I hope some people are attached enough to be sad. So we can't put the cart before the horse. We have to feel the pain in order to get through the other side to the next chapter. So even when you're ready, okay, even when you feel you've done your grief work, you might still have these questions. Because again, we're very influenced by our environment, what people are thinking. Is it okay? Is it okay if I go to that barbecue and I have a good time? It felt good, but then I felt guilty. And then I looked at other people and I wondered whether or not they thought I loved my child enough. No, we need a reprieve from grief every now and then, as long as you're doing your grief work. So it's okay to feel some hesitation. It might feel a little disloyal, that the grief feels a little lighter or easier to bear. But that's also the natural outcome of your grief work. So here are some things to consider. You decide how you will move on. Maybe you've been moving on from day one. Maybe at the beginning of the grief process, you were moving on because you chose to get out of bed and take a breath. And then maybe later on, you were living on because you made a decision. So maybe it wasn't moving on. Maybe you've been choosing to live on. So how about we use that term, live on. There is I can't think of her name right now, but a YouTube, not on YouTube, I think a TED Talk. She talks about moving on with my grief, moving forward with my grief. But when you've done the grief work, the grief isn't huge. It doesn't occupy your thoughts. You're not going to experience all those physical, emotional, spiritual, cognitive issues that we saw in one of the first slides. Those would have subsided. So yes, we can move forward with our grief because there is no closure, there is no end to it. You'll always be dancing with your grief. But it won't be controlling you. So maybe you have been moving on. Coming here is moving on. But you have to make sure you've done your grief work. And that requires brutal honesty. At some point in time, we have to say the life we had planned is no longer possible. This is ongoing and continuing. Who am I now? Even when you've got a really good sense of self, it's not unusual to ask that. Because the people in our life kind of mirror us, right? They form part of our identity. Our parents obviously were there from the beginning. Our children are part of us. Our siblings are part of us. Our partners are the people we choose to be with. So this is an ongoing process that you're going to be continuously wondering. And when you develop that continuing bond, the living on and writing the new chapter isn't going to feel like disloyalty. Because they're there with you. So who is this person who died? What did they bring to the dance of your life? The memories that hurt now at the beginning of the process are the same memories that gave you joy. The same heart that hurts was the same heart that was filled with joy. What did this person bring into your life? How have they changed you? How have they made you a better person? Keep talking about them. Don't worry about making other people uncomfortable. Use their names. That's very important. Especially as you move forward and you're helping somebody else, use that person's name when you're with the bereaved. And maybe you want to continue a tradition. Using the plates, right? Using mom's good china. Maybe that's your continuing bond. Maybe you can choose to do something to honor them. Start a scholarship. Donate money in their memory. After you've done your grief work. And one of the things you have to understand when you're in the midst of your pain is that sadness is compatible with gratitude. You can't have sad and happy at the same time. They're different sides of the same coin, but you can have sad and gratitude. And sometimes it's very difficult to acknowledge that. But without knowing your stories, I'm sure you can choose at least one or two things that you're grateful for. And sometimes in the midst of the grief storm, we have to force ourselves to think about what we do have in our lives. She was no longer wrestling with the grief, but could sit down with it as a lasting companion and make it a share in her thoughts. You're never done with it. There's no closure. There's no finish line. We just get better at carrying our grief. So, when you're ready to move on or live on, it's okay for you to create new memories without your loved one. It's going to hurt at the beginning, but it's okay. It's also okay to treasure the memories you had. It's also okay not to be focused on your grief. And I'll tell you something. When I get clients come to me, they want to feel better. And then as soon as they start feeling better, what do you think the next thought, the next experience, the next feeling is? Guilt, guilt, guilt. Michelle said guilt, exactly. Well, I shouldn't feel better. But if you've done your grief work, that doesn't last very long because it's authentic. You felt the pain. It feels okay after the initial jolt of grief. So it's okay not to be focused on your grief. If you lost a partner, it's okay to find companionship. It's okay to live on your own. It's okay to include your deceased child when asked, how many children do you have? It's okay to honor traditions in memory of. Playing their favorite song, making their favorite dish, going to their favorite restaurant on their birthday. Do what feels right to you. It's okay to smile. It's okay also to laugh. It's okay to have a belly laugh. I love it when my clients say, I really had a belly laugh and it felt good. It felt okay. I didn't feel I was betraying my loved one. If you've lost a child, an infant, it's okay to have another baby after you've done your grief work. Not to have a baby to replace the child you lost. If you lost a partner, you choose what to do with your wedding rings. Your choice, nobody else's. If you're still married in your heart, that's fine. That's okay. It's okay not to be consumed by your grief, too. It's okay to move from the home you shared with your loved one, as long as you're not doing it because it's a trigger. Because then you're suppressing and avoiding your grief. Grief purse. When you've processed your grief and you're on the next chapter, remember I said we always dance with our grief? You might have a grief burst. I like to say grief embrace. That's when grief kind of taps you in the shoulder and go, remember me? And all of a sudden, you kind of go, wow. You're not sliding back. Doesn't mean you haven't done your grief work. Just means grief wants to remind you you're still there. A song may come on. Or you might see somebody in the community that reminds you of your loved one. It's just a grief burst. It's okay to start investing in new and meaningful activities. That may take a little while to find purpose and meaning. Don't rush that. However, remain open to anything. Ultimately, you have to give yourself permission. No one else can do that. To live on. Only you. Your loved ones can't do it for you. Your counselor or therapist can't do it for you. Your faith leader can't do it for you. You have to give yourself permission. And in order to live on, and to live on in a healthy way, you've got to find a way to live in the present while still honoring your past. So, I'm going to end with this. I won't repress the expression of pleasure. I won't be afraid to join in laughter. I will instead be thankful that I can still experience feelings of joy. My loved one would not want me to remain mirrored in the deepest and darkest of emotions. This transition represents life reaching forward towards a new life, not life continually reaching backward. So trust that you've got it in you to sustain the pain that comes with the grief waves. And do it for yourself, and do it in the legacy of your loved one. So I wish you all the best. Any questions or comments? Anything at all? Anybody commenting or questioning from cyberspace? No? Okay, thanks, Alyssa. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being courageous enough to face your pain. We will be having another presentation live, should nothing change as far as the pandemic's concerned, at the end of next month, and it's on self-care. Okay? Take care of yourself. Safe drive home. Good night, everyone. Thank you.